Not really. This has been well trailed over the last couple of weeks that the UK and the EU have reached some sort of agreement. Indeed, people thought it might be unveiled last weekend or indeed even earlier than that. So it's been pretty clear they've been getting quite close for some time. But, given the events of the last year in British politics, is it a surprise that the UK and the EU seem to have managed to conclude a deal? Then that probably is a surprise. It wasn't probably going to happen under Liz Truss. It certainly wasn't going to happen under Boris Johnson as Prime Minister.
Yes, and that has been quite interesting that Rishi Sunak has been able to push this. Let's just talk firstly about the current issues that the UK has with the Northern Ireland Protocol as it stands.
So there's sort of three big issues, one of which is, how easy is it for goods to move from Great Britain into Northern Ireland? One of the effects of the deal that Boris Johnson agreed with the EU was to effectively put the EU border down the Irish Sea for goods. And the EU insisted that all the formalities that applied if you were moving goods from a real third country into the EU applied there. So what Rishi Sunak seems to have secured is some way, we don't know the detail yet, some way where basically there's minimal or no checks, we don't know that yet, for goods moving from GB into Northern Ireland. So if you're a consumer in Northern Ireland, it won't be that much different than if you're a consumer somewhere else, just from England to England or whatever. So that's one thing. The second thing that they've been worried about is, do Northern Ireland politicians get any say on rules? We don't know where that's going to be landed, nor do we know whether there'll be a residual role for the European Court of Justice or how the government will have dealt with that set of concerns. And the third one is when a policy change is made in the UK, say on tax policy, when the Chancellor changed VAT rates on energy efficiency, he couldn't apply that in Northern Ireland under the terms of the protocol. So we're expecting that probably will change, and some rules about how we subsidise industries and things like that. So those are the three big areas that we're expecting to see changes in, but we don't know the details yet.
For sure. What have been the non-negotiables for the EU?
So the bit that's really non-negotiable for the EU is what they call the integrity of the single market. So they want to be pretty sure that if goods are circulating in Northern Ireland, because there are no checks at a land border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, that they don't find goods that don't meet their standards going into the EU. So they've been particularly concerned about agricultural goods and food products and things like that, where they are very worried about UK lower standards, not meeting EU standards. The other thing that there's been a real red line for them, and it's quite a red line on the other side, so this is where it's really interesting to see where they end up compromising, is that is of the final say on EU law of the European Court of Justice. That's an anathema to the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. It's an anathema to many of Rishi Sunak Brexit supporting backbenchers. So it'll be very interesting to see whether the government can convince them that the ECJ risk, if you like, is reduced so much that they can effectively ignore it. But that's been one of the big red lines for the EU.
And to your earlier point about Rishi Sunak pushing this through, does he have the political backing to get this deal done, considering some of the promises that were made to the Brexiteers?
So it's quite interesting. He may not technically need a vote to get this done. He's using the government's prerogative powers. There's quite a lot of flexibility in the protocol to change the way in which it's implemented, and that seems to be what this deal is doing. But he does have the numbers if he wanted to ram something through, because the opposition parties have all said they will support him on this. They want to see a deal. His problem, as you say, is with his backbenchers. So I think the real risk to him is not in terms of numbers, but it's in terms of politics. Because as they say, to be a prime minister, you can get an absolutely critical policy for you only through with the votes of opposition MPs is not a good look and massively undermines your political authority. So the real threat to Rishi Sunak's political authority comes not from the opposition parties, but comes from those sitting behind. If the rebellion is very small, dissatisfaction is quite low, then he will have cemented his prime ministership very effectively. If it looks like 100 or so, those sort of giant numbers we saw rebelling under Theresa May, then he may be a lame duck for as long as he survives.
Yeah, difficult times. Good to talk to you, Jill. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.